dear viewers. This story was written by a talented Ukrainian writer, Amora Babler. My wife and I lived in a small town. As it happens, we are both Irish. That's my parents and hers moved to America, and a few years ago, she and I met by chance at a bus stop. We happened to be traveling in the same direction, and there were only 2 seats available at the time, and next to each other. We didn't hesitate to sit together. On the way, we talked and learned about each other's roots. I was in the army at the time, and I had a short vacation for a couple of days. The girl Ashlyn was very pretty, polite and good-natured, and I immediately liked her. I didn't hesitate to ask her out on a date in a cafe, and she fortunately agreed. The next day, we spent some wonderful hours together. As we learned more and more about each other, we both realized that we were starting to fall in love with each other. But soon I had to drive again for the service. Ashlyn promised to wait for me. We exchanged addresses, and while I was in the service, we wrote letters to each other. When my mandatory service was over and I finally returned home to my hometown, after seeing my parents, especially my mother who tried so hard not to let me out of her arms, I rushed to meet Ashlyn. She was home alone at the time and tending to the flowers in her garden. When she saw me, she threw away all her equipment and ran to meet me after a passionate kiss. She invited me into the house and we talked for a couple of hours. I told her how I served, and she tried not to hide anything from me. What she was doing while I was away, then her parents came home from work. I had known them since before I left. But they remembered me, and Ashlyn kept them from forgetting their favorite. Sean, welcome back. Her father gave me a big handshake. Ashlyn's been bugging us all about you. Didn't wait. Oh well. Here I am now. I'm all at her disposal. I'll go and make us a snack. Aisling, have you fed your guest? Her mother cut in and went into the kitchen. Soon, we had a modest wedding, with only family invited. Ashlyn's family wasn't wealthy, her father and mother worked hard. But I didn't care. I was so in love with this girl that I wanted to take care of her for the rest of my life. My parents offered us to live with them, as our house was quite spacious and there was enough room. But I wanted to live separately from my parents. In the army headquarters, where I served, I was offered to serve further, with a good position, for good merits, and this is a decent salary and an apartment in the future. I didn't hesitate long, though before answering, I consulted with my wife. She was fine with it. I understand you perfectly well. I can see that you like this kind of work. Don't worry about me. You'll be home a lot more often now. They won't send you away for a couple of years again. I hope not. But being in the army could mean moving around a lot. You realize that? It's possible that I could get transferred to another city and we'd have to change places. That's okay. The important thing is that we're together. The rest is just the little things in life. I was pleased that she completely agreed with my future work. I'll be honest. I liked the position that I was offered. We stayed in our town for a while. I commuted to work. My wife was home first, then got a job as a nanny for a family that lived nearby. Ashlyn always knew how to get along with children, and the people who offered her a job saw from the first hours how she befriended their 5-year-old son and treated him with kindness and care. They paid her well there too. The people were quite nice. They treated her well enough, and she tried to do her job as well as she could. She even helped them around the house, cleaning and cooking, and they rewarded her for that. It went on like that for about 6 months. Ashlyn even managed to get used to them. But it happened that they needed to move to another city. Ashlyn couldn't go with them, of course. Even the boy she was babysitting had gotten used to her, and he was sorry to part with her. For a while, my wife was home without a job again. She did some searching, of course. But the town was small and there were no vacancies. There were no suitable ones for her yet. Getting a higher education was not possible for her either. For some reasons, we sometimes talked to her about it, and I promised that as soon as I could. I would do my best to get her into university. But time went on. After a couple of weeks, I was transferred to another facility, and we had to move to it. It was just like I thought it would happen. We rented a small house for a modest fee and settled in. A couple of months later, I thought Ashlyn seemed sad about something. When I asked her, she said she missed her parents and wanted to visit them. The fact that she had written to them and they to her didn't seem enough. I didn't mind her going to see them. It was a pity I couldn't go with her myself on account of duty. But I decided to give her a little gift and bought a cell phone for her and her parents. And her Christians, now that she is not with them, they could call more often or even Skype. She was very grateful for such a gift. She was going to visit her parents for 3 days, no more than that. She didn't want me to be alone without a proper home-cooked meal. But I said that my stomach was accustomed to anything, and I myself could cook something. My wife left. I stayed home alone. The next day, I went to work as usual. There, I was almost immediately summoned by the chief, who said that I had to lead a group of fighters who will fly to the Middle East to fight, and I, as one of the best, will be their commander. Thank you for the honor, sir. But aren't there any other candidates? They ask. Unfortunately, you'll have to go. How long is it for? It's 8 months. If you're lucky. My assistant will give you all the details. Kamyam, get going. The flight leaves tomorrow morning. You have time to say goodbye to your family. I was well aware that this moment might come at some point. And since I got my leave today, I went home and called Ashlyn first thing. She was so saddened by the news, she cried into the phone. Then she took the first bus back home, arriving in time to spend one last night with me before the long separation. I understood her anxiety and promised to come back as soon as I could. Take care of yourself, she cried. Don't worry about me. Everything will be all right. I promise you. She looked at me with that sad look, like she was looking at me for the last time. Chon, I have some news to tell you. I just found out recently myself, but I wanted to make sure. Yes, sweetie. And what is that news? I'm pregnant. She even smiled through her tears. We're having a baby. Honestly, I was speechless for a moment. This was such great news for me, and now I was so sorry to have to fly east for a few months. I would have loved to be with my wife all that time, to see her throwing up in the morning, to fulfill her pregnant wishes, to see her belly growing, and to put my ear to it to listen to the little man growing inside her. Aren't you happy? She asked, noticing my silence. Oh no, Ashlyn, where are you? It's just great news to me. I'm just happy. I'm just sorry I won't be around. It's okay. I'll be fine. We'll wait for you together. Just come back. She hugged me very tightly. I stroked her back gently, which she liked very much. Until the moment when I had to go. We almost never left each other's side. But duty called, and I had to go. She stood in the yard and stared at my car for a long time, until I was out of sight. I left her almost all the money I had saved up, realizing that she would need it, and promised that I would send her some amount every month. Although this would most likely be handled by my commanding officer since I would be away. Upon arriving at headquarters, the first thing I did was share the news with him and ask for his help. He agreed to send my paycheck to my wife at a specified address, understanding my situation. A month went by. My team and I found ourselves in a deserted place, where there were several small settlements with people with whom we had to fight. Every now and then, I managed to call my wife. She was glad to hear my voice, and was glad that I was all right. Meanwhile, I was interested in her and our child's health, but then we were moved a little farther away where cell phone service didn't work, and I couldn't talk to her for a long time. Ashlyn stayed home alone. She couldn't get a job in the town we'd moved to last time. She was lonely being home alone, so she looked everywhere for ads. And when she lost contact with me for a while, she became terribly sad and lonely. One day, she was standing at a bus stop, and while she was waiting for transportation, she happened to see an ad for a housekeeper and a phone number. Ashlyn immediately took a photo of the ad double-eats, and then decided not to wait and immediately dialed the number. Hello, I'm listening. She heard a woman's voice. Hello, I'm calling on your audience. You need a governess? Tell me, do you have any work experience and references? Yes, of course. I have experience. I have a lot of skills and a very responsible attitude to my work. Ashlyn spoke briefly about her previous employment. All right, Mrs. Dalton, but I want to warn you at once that the place where you will have to work is very far from the city. You'll be able to live and work there. You'll be assigned a room. Do you agree? Yes. Ashlyn answered after a few seconds of silence. My husband is on a long business trip, so I'm ready to start working right away for a few months. Okay. Can you tell me where you are? We'll send a car to pick you up. Don't bring too much stuff. You'll have everything you need there. Okay. Ashlyn replied and explained the address where she could be picked up. When she got home, she tried to call me again to tell me the news that she had found a job and that it would make it easier for her to spend the time apart. But there was still no connection, so she sent a text message to my number, hoping that as soon as I was in range, I would hear from her. All evening, she tried calling me over and over again. Unable to stand it, she called my commanding officer. She began to ask him if he had heard from me. He replied that sometimes they communicate via satellite and that I was fine. After calming down, she started talking to the baby again. Although her belly was not yet visible, she could already feel him inside her. She told him how much she loved him and his daddy, how she was looking forward to my return. The car came to pick her up the next morning, about 9 o'clock. Aisling called her parents, told them the news, and asked them to contact me to let me know where she had found a job and to name the neighborhood where she would be taking. The driver in the car was tall and thin, even a little scary on his face. Seeing him from the doorstep, Aisling was a little frightened, but she went to the car. The driver got out and opened the back door, asking her to sit there. They drove for a long time, first on the highway, then turned onto a deserted road, and there again the journey went on for a long time, crossing some clearings of trees and turning a few times. Sometimes fields could be seen in the distance, just along the way. Aisling tried to send a few messages to me, roughly giving me directions, but soon the connection disappeared altogether. There wasn't a single bar on the phone to indicate that they could communicate. They arrived at the site well after noon. Aisling got out of the car. She looked around. The place was deserted. There was a huge 3-story house, very old. It looked like it hadn't been renovated in a long time, and some of the corners had wild shrubbery growing on the walls, which made the house look even more creepy. She also noticed a few barns, a stable with horses, and a couple of small houses, one of which the driver lived in. Aisling looked at her phone again. The net was still gone. She stood by the car and waited. The driver got out too and stayed that way. After a minute, a woman in her 30s, dressed somewhat old-fashioned for the time, came out of the house, and only then did the driver gesture to Aisling that it was okay to approach the house. "So, hello. You must be Aisling," she asked right off the bat. "Yes. Hello. I didn't realize you lived so far away. Are you going to work? Or are you scared? Oh no. Oh no. I'm ready to get started right now." "Oh good. My brother and I live here. My name is Rosalind, and my brother's name is Johnny. We live here alone, except for the driver and the housekeeper who quit a few days ago. Come on. I'll show you to your room and give you a uniform, and then Dick will tell you our ground rules." Dick was the driver. She followed Rosalind into the house, holding her small valise. Inside, the house seemed even darker. It was as if they were living in the last century. The only civilization they had was electricity, and that was from a generator. The room the landlady took her to on the second floor looked rather dilapidated. Even the plaster was crumbling in some places. There was a small bed, a bedside table, a closet. Back the floors were wooden, and not even painted. The boards creaked in some places. "This is your room. Make yourself comfortable. Uniforms are in the closet. Don't be long. Get changed and go downstairs. Dick will be waiting for you." There, she's gone. She hadn't even smiled once the whole time. Aisling decided not to be made to hesitate, and without even laying out her things, she changed and went downstairs where she was directed. Down there, she made her way into the kitchen where her driver was waiting for her. Aisling looked around. Everything was so old. Even the stove was a regular stove built of stone. "This is the kitchen. This is where the cooking is done," he said in his gruff voice. "You can cook, can't you?" "Yes, of course. But what, don't they have a proper stove? How am I supposed to cook on it? Like, everyone before you people have been cooking on these for centuries. The utensils are over there." He pointed a long, thin finger at a large cupboard. "The groceries are over there on the table. Is a list of dishes that the owners usually liked to eat. There's even a book with some recipes left in it. Some former employees decided to write them down. You'll learn quickly. The rest of what you have to do is to keep order. Don't make noise. Don't disturb the hosts when they are eating, and stand in the corner in case they need anything. Also, don't ask them any questions. Are you even allowed to talk to you?" He was quiet for a section moment, at first, then answered, "Sometimes I can see, but I'm not very talkative either." "Where are their parents? Why do they live here alone?" "Their parents died a long time ago. When they were 16, they've been running things on their own ever since." "That's a pity." "What a pity. It's a pity. Their parents are dead. Poor kids. It must have been hard on them." "Meat as well as fruit and salads." Johnny got the game himself. He had been hunting since he was a boy and had a knack for getting meat to eat. In one of the rooms, when Dick was giving her a tour, Aisling noticed that all the walls were decorated with stuffed heads of different animals. Who had done all this? It's the owner's hobby. He likes to make some trophies from his prey. But you will rarely come into this room. He likes to be here alone. Even when you come to clean here, knock first and make sure there's no one here. Then enter. He doesn't like to be disturbed without permission. There was also a huge basement in the house, and when Dick took Ashlyn down there, it seemed so huge that she could get lost in it. There were freezers for meat and a rack of wine at the other end. Every night, the owners have a wine dinner. Don't forget that. It's so creepy in here, she said, noticing how dark it was and lots of cobwebs in the corners. It had been a couple of months. Ashlyn had gotten used to her new job and tried not to break the rules, and if she needed to know anything, she went to Dick first. And only when he said to ask the owners, only then did she go to them. Rosalind and Johnny were very strange people, at least it seemed that way to Ashlyn. Though considering how they got to live their lives, she even understood their behavior a little. They were mostly silent, talked mostly only when they were alone together. Johnny was strange in general. He often went hunting during the days, liked to take care of horses, and in the evenings he sat in the house in his pajamas and long robe. And when he was in the parlor reading books, Ashlyn would catch glimpses of him as she passed by. But he approached her quite rarely, sometimes asking her to bring a refill of wine to his study where he liked to sit lounging and admiring his trophies. Rosalind was the one who mostly dealt with Ashlyn, giving her various instructions. Although the chores around the house were the same every day, there were still other errands that had to be done occasionally. But it wasn't hard for Ashlyn. Listen, Dick. She sat down with him one day while he was heating the stove and she was peeling potatoes. How long have you worked here? 20 years. I've been here since their parents were alive, and you've been here all the time. Didn't you ever think of getting married? No, but why? How can you be alone for so many years? It's none of your business. He turned around and went out for more firewood. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Ashlyn apologized when he came back. And Johnny, he's single too. And Rosalind, so they like it that way. But haven't they ever tried to start a family of their own? Oh, listen. You're starting to ask unnecessary questions. Dick muttered. Ashlyn shut up and went on about her business. He liked to meet sometimes with the housekeepers who used to be here. Dick decided to answer a few minutes later. Funny though. Ashlyn was worried about herself. Don't worry. If he hasn't approached you about it, you're not his type. Dick smirked, and that smirk even scared Ashley a little. Still, her fears were soon coming true. Johnny would sometimes call her into his trophy room and make her clean it in his presence. Ashlyn felt uncomfortable with this. Then one day, he came up behind her as she was dusting a shelf. He didn't do anything to her. He just stood behind her and looked at her. She could feel his breath on her butt, continued dusting. Just when she was done in that spot and needed to move to another, he blocked her path with his hand. She turned toward him. Mr. Maurice, I have work to do. Thin work. Petroli stales excess. Let me in. Don't you get it, dummy? From now on, you'll have another duty. Ashlyn only stared at him fearfully, guessing what he meant. He leaned toward her and sniffed her neck. I am a married woman. What do you think you're doing? But she received a slap in return. There was no one else in the house at the time. Rosalind and her driver had gone to the city to do some shopping, and there was no one to call for help. Johnny took advantage of this moment. He pinned Ashley against the wall, pulled up the hem of her uniform, and raped her with one hand over her mouth to keep her from screaming. The crying girl ran out of his room, burning with shame. Johnny hurried to catch up with her. He grabbed her arm in the gloomy hallway and held her against the wall again. If you dare tell anyone, I'll kill you. I'm pregnant, Ashlyn cried. Johnny scrutinized her from head to toe. Oh, you didn't say that when you applied for the job. Oh, wow. That's a change. Ashlyn had hoped that because she was pregnant, Johnny wouldn't bother her anymore. But he said something else that scared her even more. Then let's do it another way. You will come to me sometimes and please me. Otherwise, I'll make sure your baby dies. Do you understand? He looked at her so sinisterly that Ashlyn was ready to fall through the ground. What choice did she have now? Accept it to save the baby's life or tell Rosalind everything? But she was strange, and there was no telling how she'd react to the news. Or maybe we could try to run away. But where to? She couldn't remember the way here. She couldn't call anywhere because there was no connection. That evening, when Rosalind and Dick returned, Ashlyn decided to ask him for advice. How do I get out of here? What's wrong? Johnny, he wants me to be with him. Well, then I can't help you. But you could take me out of here, couldn't you? You have to understand. I'm pregnant. My husband will be back from his business trip soon. He's only got a few months left there. You have to help me. Dick looked at her. Ashlyn realized that he was in on it and wouldn't help her in any way. She cried, What's going on? Rosalind walked in and saw Ashlyn crying. Mrs. Maurice, I want to leave. Patient sad. Ashlyn's, but you can't. You signed a contract to work for us for a few months. Just remember, Percy brother's hitting on me? I want to go home. Let me go. All screamed at Ashlyn. Right, you little bitch, screamed Rosalind. You dare to seduce my brother. Wretched little whore. At that moment, Ashlyn realized that she was all alone in this house, and no one would help her. Not even Dick, who until then had seemed the most human of the three. Rosalind walked out of the kitchen in anger. Dick looked at her like, I told you so, and went to his room as well. Ashlyn was left alone crying in the kitchen. For a moment she thought that Rosalind would be angry at her brother for what he had done, but the house was silent. Only Ashlyn's cries and the pounding of her frightened heart could be heard. At night, Ashlyn gathered all the belongings she had come here with and tried to leave the house quietly. She was determined to run for as long as it took until she could get to at least one living person. On her phone, she continued to write messages about what was happening to her in this house and sent them to me. But the messages were never sent, remaining hanging on hold. And when Ashlyn was already out the door and had time to walk a few feet away, she was intercepted by Dick. He grabbed her, covering her mouth with his hand to keep her from screaming, and dragged her into the barn where he tied her to an old chair and tied her mouth shut. Then he left, and a few minutes later Johnny appeared. He entered slowly, shining a kerosene lamp. A meter away from Ashlyn, he stopped. Putting the lamp on the floor, he pulled a huge hunting knife from behind his back and pointed it at Ashlyn's stomach. Her eyes rounded with horror, and her fear and terror were evident in them. Johnny ran the point of the knife across Ashlyn's stomach. But he didn't cut it, he just drew it, showing the line usually used when dissecting an animal's belly. Do you remember what I told you? Remember what I promised you I'd do if you disobeyed me? Tell me, don't you care about your child's life? Do you want me to kill him? Ashlyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. Well, there you go, you little whore. I'm being kind today, and I'm gonna give you one last chance. You will obey all my orders. Otherwise, I will fulfill my promise. As you can see, you can't escape from here. Not ever. None of them have ever succeeded. Fear filled Ashlyn even more. Annie began to grope her, and when he fumbled for his cell phone in his pocket, he pulled it out, threw it to the floor, and stuck his knife in it. Now Ashlyn couldn't even text about anything. All hope of saving her had collapsed in an instant. Months went by. Ashlyn had to do what Johnny made her do, in addition to her regular job. Her belly had grown big enough already, but Johnny would find a way to take advantage of the situation. Ashlyn put up with it all and soon even got used to it. She put up with it all for the sake of the baby, so that it would survive. And she hoped that the messages she had sent to me earlier, I would get them someday and come to save her. But the places my squad had been sent to were out of range. The only recent message I'd gotten from my commander, via satellite, was that Ashlyn had found a job and was going to go there for a few months, warning me that there would likely be no communication. I continued to warble on, knowing nothing and hoping that she and my son were okay. But time passed, and when the term of service was coming to an end, we still won, and soon we were going to return to our homeland. As it was agreed where the helicopter would pick us up, we had a long walk to get to our destination. And as we were already flying and passing over a stretch of civilization, my phone beeped. I pulled it out and received a text message, the last one my wife had managed to send, giving the approximate location of her future job. Understandably, the others never reached me as they were unable to ship. When I returned home, I found the house empty and no one had been there for a long time. But it looked like someone had taken advantage of the looters, because the window had been broken. But there was nothing to steal, just an old TV set. And the refrigerator was empty and open. I contacted Ashlyn's parents and tried to gently find out any information, trying not to alarm them. But her mother only sent the photo of the ad that Ashlyn had once sent her. I called the number, but the girl said she didn't know anything about Ashlyn and that she was just a secretary and the owners lived far away from where she worked. I had no choice but to go to my commander for help. With the help of special equipment, we quickly found out where the building with the phone number listed in the ad was located. Arriving there in a military jeep with a few colleagues, I found a tiny house with a few rooms where a young family lived. When we broke in, I started questioning them and even threatened them with a gun. The girl only replied that she answers the phone and she gets paid for it. And when someone is going to get a job in that ad, she sends a letter by special courier. So with the help of coworkers and guns, we found the courier and the address where my wife went to work. All this time, I felt that she was in some kind of danger, often trying to call her number. I was told that the number was either out of range or not in service. I was mad as hell. Ordering that young family and the courier to be quiet, we went to look for my wife. We felt tired, but we were all trained guys, and without even knocking, we broke into the house, waving our weapons. At the noise from the second floor came down a frightened mistress in a white long robe, and also weapons. I'm sure that the noise from the second floor came down a frightened mistress in a white long robe and also ran out and the owner himself. Where is she? Where is my wife? I began to shout, pointing a machine gun at them. Who's your wife? What are you talking about? Johnny asked. Who are you people? What do we do? Ashlyn, please. Where is she? I know she's here. I kept yelling. After that, I saw Ashlyn appear from behind Johnny. She lost a lot of weight. She was hiding behind his back, holding a baby in her arms. I looked at the scene and didn't understand what was going on. Why isn't she coming to me at all, since it's been so long since we've seen each other? Why is she just standing behind this man, looking at me like a stranger? I ordered the fighters to grab the hosts as well as Dick, their driver, who had come running to the noise. With all three of them sitting on the couch at gunpoint, I approached Ashlyn. Oh, honey. Ashlyn, it's me. What happened to you? Is that our son? Or is it our daughter? Is that our child? Say something. I tried to hug her, but she didn't react. She just stood there looking at me. I took her hand and led her to a room where we could talk alone. She didn't let the baby out of her arms for a moment. I sat her down on the bed. Chin on the bedside table, I saw a carafe of water and a glass. Pouring the water and handing it to her, she took a few sips like a zombie and put the glass down. I managed to pick it up before it hit the floor. Sean, she finally said it. Yeah, honey, I'm right here. What did they do to you? I'm sorry, but I'm not your wife anymore. I belong to Johnny, right? I don't understand. What are you talking about? I texted you, but the messages didn't go through. I didn't go through. And him, he takes care of me and the baby. She briefly recounted the story of the last few months to me, but it was enough for me to hear a few words from her to make me angry. I rushed downstairs. The bastards, what did you do to her? I pulled the trigger and fired a line at all three of them. If anyone asks questions, tell them they resisted. I gave orders to the soldiers. Then I lowered Ashlyn carefully to take her to the car to get her out of there and take her to the hospital. As we passed the living room, she saw the bloody bodies on the couch out of the corner of her eye but said nothing. When I arrived in town, the first thing I did was take her to the hospital. Both she and the baby were examined. The baby was fine, but they said he'd been a little malnourished lately. Ashlyn wasn't. She wasn't physically ill, although the doctors found a few scars on her that hadn't been there before. But her mental state was of great concern to the doctors. During the whole day, while they were examining her, she didn't even think about the baby. Ashlyn had to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. I visited her often, but she just shut down and never said another word. She just sat there staring at nothing. Our little son was growing up. He didn't understand anything yet. But I had to figure out how to tell him what had happened to his mom and why she wasn't likely to ever come home. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating for us. We need your feedback to improve our content.